WVEC-TV, Plan. Here we go.
This is Jeff McKay, ABC News.
In 2013, sequestration was a series of across-the-board budget cuts that reduced federal spending. The cuts were required by the Balanced Budget and Emergency Deficit Control Acts. They had a huge impact on military operations and upon private defense contractors which support the U.S. Armed Forces. We brought together regional stakeholders to discuss the impact. This is our Emmy-nominated news special, Sequestration, Finding Our Future.
March 1st has come and nearly gone. This is the deadline for sequestration.
The impact of this policy won't be felt overnight, but it will be real.
A massive budget cut looms, the first of several.
This is a ridiculous, haphazard policy.
While the politicians fight in Washington, the workers who make Hampton Roads thrive, and our Navy mighty.
The young ones, they don't know what they're going to do. They all stressed and worried to death for real.
Are worried about what tomorrow brings in the new era of budget cuts. Tonight, we get some answers.
This is a 13 News special presentation, Sequestration, Finding Our Future. Now, here are your hosts, David Allen and Regina Mobley.
Good evening, and thank you for joining us for this special presentation. I'm David Allen.
And I'm Regina Mobley. We are now 19 hours past the deadline for a deal, but it's not set in stone yet.
We are in the last hours. See, the law that went into effect this morning requires the president to issue the sequester order today. He technically has until midnight to do that. And he met with leaders from both parties in a last-ditch hope of a deal. It was not successful.
We're going to start this special broadcast with 13 News military reporter Mike Gooding. Mike, a lot of folks know sequestration could be financially devastating for the region, but what exactly does this word mean?
Well, Regina, David, only in Washington could somebody possibly conjure up such a phrase. But here it is in our lives, maybe bringing a lot of pain with it.
To try and understand what sequestration is, it might be helpful to comprehend what the word itself means. According to the Merriam-Webster dictionary, it's to set apart, segregate, seclude, withdraw. Now, that's all fine and good, but in practical terms, what you really need to do is go back in time a little to the Budget Control Act of 2011. It passed both chambers of Congress and was signed by President Obama on August 2nd of that year in the wake of an impasse over the federal debt. The act sets up the current sequestration process, which imposes across-the-board automatic cuts over 10 years of $1.2 trillion, split 50-50 between defense and domestic discretionary spending. And as for Hampton Roads, the implications are profound. The military, and particularly the Navy, would be especially hard hit, with needed maintenance on ships canceled, flight hours cut back, ship operations at sea reduced, and thousands of civilian DoD workers facing furloughs and a loss of 20% of their pay. All of that would impact the private sector in a big way, with layoffs at local shipyards and related businesses possible. And even companies which have nothing to do directly with the military would feel it. Restaurants, for example, could see their profits sink, and they in turn might have to lay off people. Old Dominion University has estimated Hampton Roads could lose $1.45 billion and 28,000 jobs over the next 3 years, and not just military jobs, but
housing sector, tourism, and local businesses.
Are you worried?
We are concerned, yes.
So in that way, while local people may not know what the word sequestration means, they know what it could mean in their lives, and it's not good.
I'm a little bit concerned because we don't know exactly what's happening, if people are going to get laid off or, you know, what the deal is, because all the rumors. If we knew what it is that's going to happen, we would know what plans to make after that.
And a new report from ODU out today projects that Hampton Roads stands to lose more than 12,000 jobs this year alone due to the automatic spending cuts. Regina, David.
All right, thanks, Mike. As we mentioned, the deadline has come and gone.
We want to get a feel for what's happening or not happening in Washington tonight. 13 News Washington reporter Sue Turner is here for our special report now. And Sue, we know tonight that Congress is not there.
No, everybody has gone home, including the congressional leaders, David. You know, they had this meeting today at the White House, and there wasn't anything decided there. It wasn't a complete waste of time because it's always good to get the two sides talking, but they are no closer to a deal than before they met. Well, congressional leaders spend more time on the blame game than they do coming up with a plan.
Ultimately, if Mitch McConnell or John Boehner say we need to go to catch a plane, I can't have Secret Service block the doorway.
While there are smarter ways to cut spending than the process that we're about to engage on, the House shouldn't have to pass a third bill before the Senate does anything.
Lawmakers of the districts hardest hit are scrambling to do something.
We're going to come forward with proposals that help mitigate these consequences for national defense, and we think we'll see them as soon as next week.
The president has been talking about the effect all week on everything from education to health, and especially the toll it will take on the Defense Department.
Businesses that work with the military, like the Virginia shipbuilder that I visited on Tuesday, may have to lay folks off. Communities near military bases will take a serious blow. All of this will cause a ripple effect throughout our economy.
Fixing the sequester isn't going to be any easier when it's in effect. Congress has to pass a budget by March 27th, then deal with raising the debt ceiling in May.
I did lay out that the House is going to move a continuing resolution next week to fund the government past March 27th.
All while federal workers get notices like these.
This memorandum notifies you that the Department of Justice proposes to furlough you.
Now, Congress is scheduled to come back next week. By then, the cuts will be well underway to being implemented. Live in Washington, Sue Turner, 13 News.
Sue, while we have you, if there was 1 ounce of hope today, it seems that both sides are willing to at least have a conversation about cuts to Medicare and closing tax loopholes. Am I being overly optimistic there?
Well, they are willing to have a conversation, but there is a big divide between Republicans and Democrats. Republicans don't want to talk about taxes at all because they say the president got his tax increase on January 1st when they temporarily put off all that stuff that had to do with the fiscal cliff. So Speaker of the House John Boehner is really driving this, that he only wants to talk about spending cuts in this particular conversation. That is why you haven't seen the two sides come closer together.
So on the subject of Medicare, the president could also have a tough battle within his own party when it comes to cutting Medicare.
Right. I mean, the president, Regina, has been really forthcoming, saying we have to make some tough choices as well, and we are going to have to make cuts here. But he knows that he is going to face an uphill battle from Democrats who want to preserve that and not even touch that in this whole conversation. But that, as the president says, is just not realistic.
All right. Thanks, Sue.
All right, we reached out to the entire Hampton Roads congressional delegation, invited them all to be a part of this program. Congressman Scott Ridgell and Senators Mark Warner and Tim Kaine all agreed to be interviewed earlier today.
Mike Gooding asked them, what's next?
End of the day, both parties got to compromise. Republicans got to do more revenues. Democrats got to be willing to do entitlement reforms. And yes, we need to do cuts, but we need to do targeted cuts, not this sequestration that was set up to be the stupidest of all possible options, which now has become reality.
But if everybody maintains their line in the sand, the Republicans not wanting any tax increases, Democrats not wanting any entitlement reforms, then what?
Well, then America and Americans are going to suffer, and candidly, we all ought to get fired if we don't get this resolved.
And really, there's no substitute for Congress just being willing to dialogue, compromise, and act. Congress has just perfected over the last few years using every gimmick it can. Sequester was one. Continuing resolutions are a gimmick. The super committee was a gimmick. We have to get back to writing budgets in the normal course of business and making these hard decisions about spending, taxes, and deficit reduction, and that's going to require a willingness to compromise.
I'm fighting for us and our region, and Congress and the President can do what's right and replace sequestration with something far wiser. And that's what I'm working on.
Do you have a timetable in your mind as to when you think there might be some progress?
Well, we should pass a continuing resolution with the defense appropriations bill incorporated into it next week. And I want both parties to come back to the table and to really, we shouldn't be out of session unless and until we resolve this.
Congressman Bobby Scott also agreed to be part of the program. He's here in our studio right now.
Congressman, we've been hearing from people on our Facebook page all week about this subject of sequestration, and this one really caught our attention. It says, from John, he says, it's not Friday yet. They'll pull a rabbit out of the hat. And that was Tuesday. Well, here we are. It is Friday. No rabbit, no compromise, no deal. Why?
Well, one of the things we have to recognize is arithmetic. You can't cut $1.2 trillion out of the budget and not have devastating effects on the provision of government services and the economy. If you try to do things instead of mindlessly across the board, if you try to do it more intelligently and strategically, you might save the 2 million jobs that are at stake with the mindless across the board cuts. But unfortunately, 2 million other people will lose their jobs. The fact is that you can't do it without revenues. And that's why you haven't seen any specific alternative. You haven't seen anybody say, well, rather than these cuts, let's do these cuts, because you can't do $1.2 trillion in cuts that anybody would want to be associated with. And that's just an arithmetic fact. If somebody wants to come up with a list, come up with a list. And all of this has to be in the context. We're here today. We could have had this program 6 months ago, certainly 6 weeks ago, January 1st, when we voted for a $3.9 trillion tax cut. Now we need $1.2 trillion to offset the sequester. We knew we couldn't fix the sequester. The super committee met for weeks. The Republicans said no revenues. Nobody could come up with a set of cuts for $1.2 trillion. We knew we couldn't do it a year and a half ago. And so on January 1st, when we had the $1.2 trillion sequester hanging over our heads, we voted for a $3.9 trillion tax cut. It seems to me that we should have thought about today back then. Today can be no surprise to anybody that's been following what we've been doing.
I'm going to ask you the same question that was posed to the president today. Congressman, did you do all that you could have done to avoid the sequester?
Well, yeah, on January 1st, when everybody was patting themselves on the back about a $3.9 trillion tax cut, and for the 2 years before that, I was telling people that we cannot afford the tax cuts. That was an unpopular position. No, everybody hated me, fine. But the fact is, the arithmetic fact is, we could not afford even the tax cuts up to $250,000. We went up to $450,000. You didn't hear any discussion. And for the last 30 years, people have gotten to the point where they don't think tax cuts have anything to do with the budget. Ronald Reagan, all through then, you tax cut, you don't have to pay for them. Well, finally, we're so far in the ditch that if you cut taxes, you got to pay for them. And we went $3.9 trillion further in the ditch, and now we're trying to come up with $1.2 trillion to pay for them. I think the first thing we got to recognize is the $3.9 trillion tax cut was a big mistake. We should have made it maybe $2 trillion or $2.5 trillion, so you'd have enough to work with to offset the sequester. We didn't do that, and now there is no alternative. You don't lose 2 million jobs whether you do it across the board or otherwise if the decision, and the majority of the House, the Republican caucus has said definitively there'll be no revenues. And if that's the position, there is no way to intelligently do $1.2 trillion. Now, the alternatives are actually worse. I mean, this is across the board. Everybody gets a little pain. We won't be able to do services. There'll be a lot of problems, and you hear, section by section of what the problem is. The alternatives are worse. We cut taxes $3.9 trillion. Now we're talking about cutting Medicare. In order to pay for tax cuts, the cost of the tax cut from $250,000 to $450,000 to extend those tax cuts is more than you get from raising the age of Medicare from 65 to 67. Now, you put that to the people. Let's make some choices. Do you want a tax cut on that portion of your income from $250,000 to $450,000, and you're going to pay for it by raising the age of Medicare from 65 to 67? But because we do it sequentially and all out of order, do the tax cuts first, now we're broke, we got to cut Medicare, that's the position we're in. We have to recognize that we cut taxes much too much. We got to get the revenues back on the table, and then we can make some better choices. But at least let the people know what choices they're making.
Congressman, the Republicans are saying no revenue. You're saying revenue has to be on the table. Where's the hope for all those shipyard workers tonight in your district?
You're talking arithmetic. If there's no revenue on the table, you've got $1.2 trillion in cuts. If you save the shipyard jobs, you're going to cost somebody else their jobs. So 2 million jobs at stake when you cut $1.2 trillion. You cannot do it intelligently, and that is why no one has come up with an alternative. If somebody made a list of $1.2 trillion in cuts as their recommendation, and then you ask people, well, would you rather have a $2.5 trillion tax cut, not a $3.9 trillion tax cut, and not have to cut any of these? I think 90% of the public would say, well, let's let some of the tax cuts go. You can't cut all of this, and you haven't seen the list, because nobody would want to be associated with 2 million job loss, cuts that cost 2 million job loss, and all the government services that aren't going to be done.
All right, thanks so much, Congressman. We'll be back in a moment. We're back with our special report, Sequestration, Finding Our Future. $85 billion in cuts have already started. $1 trillion more will hit over the next decade. The impact is already being felt here in Hampton Roads, particularly Navy and Navy families. Mike Gooding joins us now, and the strain is already being felt, and it could get worse.
Well, that is right, Regina. It could get worse in two significant ways: in how constantly changing schedules affect morale among the troops, and how it affects the country's ability to be forward deployed around the world.
The first tangible sign of trouble was when the USS Harry S. Truman didn't deploy as planned.
So there is great disappointment, quite frankly. The crews are ready to go overseas.
That was followed weeks later by the USS Eisenhower, just back from deployment itself, having to ship out again. Ike sailors and families complained it's just not fair.
That every time they can't agree on a budget, suddenly let's just take money from the Department of Defense, and that makes me angry.
It sucks that we got to go out. Some get to stay in, but that's what we got to do.
The other people, their husbands get to stay home, and then your husband has to go back out after being gone for 6 months.
Well, it's not a question of fairness. It's a question of taking the American taxpayer dollars and distributing them the most cost-wise way.
Among other possible actions, delaying the USS Baton deployment, canceling the Blue Angels show at Oceana, and stopping repairs on 11 other ships.
And again, it's regrettable, but these are decisions we have to make to be able to stay solvent in our operating accounts through the rest of the year.
And there are also plans to furlough the Department of Defense's 800,000 civilian employees around the country. They'd be forced to take 1 day of leave per week without pay starting the last week of April for the following 22 weeks. David?
Thanks, Mike. I'm joined now by Quentin Kidd, political science professor at Christopher Newport University, retired Navy Admiral Craig Quigley, and retired Navy captain and former CO of Naval Station Norfolk, Joe Bouchard. Now, you guys all saw the report by Mike Gooding. We've not seen the Truman deploy, thousands of sailors changing their plans all before sequestration. Craig, what happens now?
Well, the next thing I believe you'd see, because of the numbers, large numbers of civil servants that serve in Hampton Roads, in the military, and also in other federal agencies throughout the region. They will be notified very soon of furlough intentions. That won't begin until the middle to the latter part of April, but they'll be notified very quickly. And these are all individuals that will then have to start planning to adjust their household income and their household spending for the rest of the fiscal year.
Joe Bouchard, at what point do we have a readiness crisis, or do we?
We're on the verge of it now. The Navy plans for implementing the sequester include canceling or deferring ship maintenance, aircraft maintenance, maintenance and construction on the bases. All of that is horrible news for fleet readiness. The first impact of it, delaying the start of Lincoln's overhaul, that is not good. Not only is it not good for the shipyard workers, but ultimately it could add to the cost of that overhaul, and it's leaving a carrier in a condition where it cannot deploy while it sits and waits for funding to start its overhaul.
Quentin Kidd, we're talking here on March 1st about the sequester. On March 27th, we're going to be talking about something else. It's another deadline, right?
The big fear is that the continuing resolution that's currently funding the federal government expires on the 27th. If Congress doesn't agree to a new one, the government shuts down. The thinking is neither party wants that to happen. And the president signaled today that he's willing to make these sequestration cuts permanent in order to get Republicans to agree to a continuing resolution. The impact of this, I don't think, can be underestimated. You know, Craig's point about all of the civilian employees that would be getting furlough notices. Our region fared the recession that we went through fairly well because we had all the federal spending, all these federal employees. We're going to see that weathering that recession so well slowly trickle away over the next 6 months as 1 day a week of pay disappears from up to 40,000 people's paychecks.
And the second and third order effects of that, David, those families will adjust their spending accordingly, as they must, and the retail sector in Hampton Roads will feel that, and it will manifest itself in 1,000 different ways throughout the region.
These are $60,000 to $90,000 a year jobs, so imagine cutting 20% of that and just removing it from the economy. That's the effect on our region.
David, I've estimated that those furloughs, the economic loss of personal income in Hampton Roads from the furloughs is going to be somewhere between $350 and $500 million, depending on how agencies implement them. That is a lot of spending in our economy that's not going to happen. And as Craig and Quentin both said, that's going to ripple throughout the regional economy and hurt a lot of businesses, especially small businesses.
Do you feel as though all the members of Congress really understand what is on the line here, what's at stake?
I believe in my conversations with our congressional delegation, the answer is yes, David, I really do. You've heard many of them speak for many months, calling for a compromise position, an alternative to sequester to be agreed upon by both houses of Congress and the administration. So, long answer to your question. The short answer, I think, is yes.
Quentin, do you agree with that?
Well, yeah, I do. I think our delegation in particular does. I think Virginia's delegation in particular does. I think there are many members of Congress and the U.S. Senate around the country who won't feel the impact of this sequestration as intensely as we do. They may not understand the significance of it as dramatically as our own delegation does.
What about our enemies? What about Iran? What about North Korea? How do they interpret this kind of news?
I can only believe that they would be encouraged by the turmoil and the churn that this puts into the American political system. If they all look at America's military as the world's most powerful and a check on some of their ambitions around the world. And the less prepared the American military can be to respond, the more they're going to like it.
That's chilling, Joe Bashir.
And if I can add, as a former strategic planner in DOD, it's not just our enemies, and they do pay close attention to us, but our allies are watching this very carefully. And this casts doubts upon our commitment, especially in the Western Pacific, especially in the Middle East. So it will raise significant concerns with our friends and allies overseas.
Can you count on the United States to be there when something happens in the world where you're counting on our assistance? Can they count on the U.S. being there when they need them?
All right, great discussion. You guys aren't going anywhere, so we'll have you back to talk a little bit more. Thanks. All right, much more to come tonight. We're back in a moment.
Along with hundreds of thousands of jobs, are currently in jeopardy because of politics in Washington. So these cuts are wrong. They're not smart. They're not fair. They're a self-inflicted wound that doesn't have to happen.
The president speaking there at Newport News Shipbuilding this week. It's notable that he flew here and spoke where he did, an indication that things could get serious real fast for some workers. Already the word layoffs cropping up, nothing in stone yet, and hopefully it won't come to that. We're joined again by military reporter Mike Gooding. And Mike, this is a frightening time for a lot of workers.
Well, that's right, David. More than 40,000 people work in the shipbuilding and ship repair industry and related businesses here in Hampton Roads, including subcontractors and suppliers. And the big worry, of course, is if Navy contracts suddenly go away, so could those jobs. The writing is already on the wall.
Got a letter? Yeah, I got one when I got out of work yesterday, and I got one this morning when I went to work.
How do you feel about that?
I feel it's wrong because I just got this job and I need it, so I hope I don't get laid off because I'm a good worker. So.
BAE Systems in Norfolk sent out warn letters to 1,600 of its workers in February that layoffs may be coming.
It's very upset because everybody need their jobs, so it's real upsetting.
And the 21,000 workers at Newport News Shipbuilding could be next if funding for the USS Abraham Lincoln overhaul doesn't come through.
Then I think we'll have to regroup and say, what does that mean for our workforce? And we will have layoffs if that happens.
Yeah, there's a lot of people concerned because they got houses, mortgages, car payments. They all got families.
Even the Washington Avenue hot dog vendor is fearful.
Yeah, I'm real worried about it. Because, you know, everybody depends on the shipyard.
And it's not just the big yards. Contractors like Crofton Industries in Portsmouth and its 100 workers could feel the pinch, too.
In the 63 years since our dad started the business, we've never let anybody go for lack of work. And we're very concerned with it.
And even businesses that aren't in the ship business at all are worried. Chip Kimnock, who owns 4 Moe's restaurants in town and who employs about 70 people, tells me these cuts are very concerning because he says there's a ripple effect, and businesses like his are usually the first to feel the pain when customers suddenly stop going out to eat. Regina?
All right, thanks, Mike. I am joined again by Craig Quigley and Peter Shaw, professor of economics at Tidewater Community College, along with Bill Crow, president of the Virginia Ship Repair Association. The first question, military cycles. We got the shocking news a few days ago that a carrier deployment was being canceled. What happens when this cycle is disrupted?
Well, Regina, it's a very carefully choreographed cycle with preparations for deployment, then coming back, going into a maintenance cycle. These things are calculated to the week, to the day, for every unit throughout the Navy. And a disruption like the Harry S. Truman saw a week or so ago puts a horrible ripple in that choreography of scheduling.
And built into that, of course, is maintenance. Many shipyards rely on carrier work and smaller ships. How could this affect the Hampton Roads area?
As I've said all along, it would be devastating, and in many cases it would be irreversible. For the 40,000 people that comprise the 233 member companies, of which you just saw Jay Crofton, he's one of our member companies, they're going to be affected in some way, form, or fashion. They're going to be furloughed. They may be laid off, but the detrimental part is more along what Craig's talking about. The ship repair industry personnel, the people that are in it, are very proud. They're very patriotic. They take enormous pride in their Navy and in its readiness. And with that maintenance with those maintenance availabilities being canceled, you'll never get that back. No matter how you try, you will never get it back.
Can the Hampton Roads economy absorb such cuts?
The short answer, no. If the cuts are sustained, the effect is permanent. And you were talking about earlier about small businesses and restaurants feeling the pain. Don't forget, the local governments will feel the pain because they're dependent upon sales tax revenues. And when the sales tax revenues go down, that immediately impacts their treasuries. And they're going to be feeling the cuts as well.
So this is just the beginning of March Madness. March 27th, we're looking at another deadline.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Absolutely.
And that's more critical than what we're actually going through now, because if the government ends up, shutting down, that will be a lot more heavy than what we're seeing now.
And these are really uncharted waters. You were telling me earlier that you can't recall under these circumstances a carrier deployment being canceled. How does the Pentagon handle the sequestration? It's never happened before.
No, I have never seen this combination of effects and events in my adult life, Regina. Never one time. And the answer to your question is, how do you handle it? You do the best you can with the cards you're dealt.
The budget process has been dysfunctional since 2009, and there are some experts who are saying this won't get cleaned up until 2016. Can the Hampton Roads area absorb, again, this type of dysfunction?
No. When I talked to you before and I said that this would be irreversible, the problem with the whole thing is that you've got many small businesses in the area that comprise our 233 member companies. They don't possess a heavy cash reserve that they could sit on and end up weathering this. They will end up going out of business. So when we turn around and we plug back in any maintenance that may become available for dollars that would come, you would end up what would end up having there is that they're going to turn around to those small businesses, which 40% of every maintenance availability has to go to small businesses. You'll turn around and you'll look at those, and they're not there anymore. The other irreversible part of that, and which is the scary part, is that we have the commercial ship repair industrial base. Tradesmen, very skilled tradesmen who are in our industry, who are being paid. If they're furloughed and if they're end up being laid off, they're going to go into another economic industry, or another industry with regards to being able to put food on their table. So when that ends up coming back, or that money comes back, you turn around, you don't have those skilled tradesmen anymore to perform that. So it's a ripple effect, and that's the irreversible part of we can't afford to lose that commercial ship repair and industrial base of those personnel that are the trade laborers.
The White House issued a report this week saying in Virginia, 90,000 DOD employees could face furloughs, losing a gross pay of $648 million. What could happen to the state of Virginia if this happens?
Well, the first impact to the state of Virginia is obviously on the front line of people's spending patterns that Admiral Quigley mentioned earlier. Reduced spending in the community, reduced tax revenues in the community. The businesses feel the effect, the local governments feel the effect, and don't forget, the state of Virginia now is going to have reduced sales tax revenue, and it depends on that to help redeploy its money back out to the communities to help pay for education, transportation, especially with the new transportation package that's going to be based heavily on sales tax. That will be impacted. Your fire and police protection and your social services. A lot of that state funding is now going to be impacted back to local governments.
All right, thank you so much for joining us. More in our special presentation, Sequestration, Finding Our Future, coming up.
Welcome back. Congressman Bobby Scott rejoins us now, along with Quentin Kidd and Peter Shaw. And let's go back to the number we were talking about a little earlier today. Old Dominion University shared its research showing that instead of gaining 5,000 jobs this year, we could lose actually 12,000 jobs. That's not this year, and that is this year, rather, not some point in the distant future. It easily could be much worse than that. Am I correct?
Yeah, and that's 12,000 jobs for the remainder of the year. We're already several months into the year, and so those percentages and those numbers just get compounded as we go down. And that's why everybody says sequestration is going to be worse as we go along. So we'll initially maybe not recognize the how dramatically damaging it could be, but as we go along, the damage just multiplies.
Talk about the strength of our economy and how it fits into the national picture.
Well, as I was discussing earlier, you have 377 regional economies in the country, and we're one of them. The top 100 produce 75% of the economic output of the country, and we're ranked about 39th or 40th. So that puts us in the top 10% tier as one of the largest in the country. And when you hit Hampton Roads, the way you're going to hit Hampton Roads with its large economy, it will be felt beyond this region, I guarantee you, because of the sheer size. And then also, you're going to see, I agree with Quentin, you're going to see rippling effect. A lot of people will be thinking, should I move to Hampton Roads? Wait a minute. They're losing jobs in Hampton Roads. They had a projection of 5,000. Now they're looking at 12,000 lost. That's a 17,000 job swing. That's significant. So a lot of people, well, wait a minute, maybe I shouldn't move there. And as I mentioned earlier, the skilled workers in the shipyards, it is important you do not lose them. Because once they go, you have a heck of a time trying to get them back because they're thinking, you know, this could happen again, and how stable are you?
Congressman Scott, how long can this go on?
Well, I think what's absent from this discussion is the alternative. This just describes what happens when you take $1.2 trillion out of the economy. You get all of these problems. Trying to rearrange where you cut does not solve the problem. You'll have the same amount of damage. You may save 2 million jobs over here by rearranging the cuts, but 2 million other people are going to lose their jobs, and you'll have the same order of magnitude of damage to the economy, of damage to government services. We're already at the lowest percentage of GDP for non-defense discretionary spending that we've been at since the 1950s. We've cut. And we even cut, a couple of years ago, we cut a couple of $100 million out of embassy security. Same people responsible for those cuts were the first ones to whine about what happened in Benghazi. But I mean, we've already cut everything we can out of non-defense discretionary. There's not much left. And so the across-the-board mindless cuts may be the only way that you can do it. The alternative is to achieve the $1.2 trillion with revenues, which goes back to January 1st. This is not a difficult problem. We found $3.9 trillion in deficit in tax cuts. Now we only need to find $1.2 trillion in deficit reduction for the sequester. I mean, that is not a difficult formula to fix.
Then why don't we have the solution?
Because we're holding this emergency special after we cut $3.9 trillion. It should have been held back in December. The warning should have been, look out, folks, they're about to cut $3.9 trillion and we're going to end up with a sequester. That's when we should have had this special, but we cut $3.9 trillion, and we're hearing that what $1.2 trillion in cuts from the economy, the damage it does. And it's arithmetic. You can't get around it. And the problem is that people have just gotten so used to the fact that tax cuts don't have anything to do with the budget. That you can cut taxes, don't have to pay for them. Well, we're so far in the ditch, when you cut the taxes, now we have to pay for it. And $1.2 trillion in pay-fors causes the damage that you've heard described today.
Quentin?
Well, we're actually feeling the effects, really, I think, for the first time as dramatically, the effects of a 25-year fight, really, that began when Ronald Reagan was elected president, and the Republicans really decided to push on lowering taxes. And it took a couple of decades, a little bit more than a couple of decades, to get to this point. So, you know, in my idea, how would we solve this? A grand bargain would solve it. A grand bargain between the two political parties that would finally settle this decades-long fight. But I'm not in the room. The congressman is potentially in the room, but I don't know if it's possible right now.
Before you start talking about grand bargains, you have to recognize that we're making choices.
Exactly.
That if we let the tax cuts expire, let them all expire, and that's unpopular. But look where we are in terms of popularity now. If you let them all expire, you would have achieved your Simpson-Bowles Deficit Reduction Commission goal of $4 trillion with $1.5 trillion left over. That would have been enough to take care of the so-called doc fix and AMT things that hit you every year, and have $500 billion left over for a jobs bill. And when's the last time anybody talked about a jobs bill? And you had that as a possibility. The choice was made to do tax cuts. And now we're in the ditch. We didn't do anything about the sequester, and we haven't come up with $1.2 trillion in spending cuts. Now, people talk about, well, you got to reform Medicare and Social Security. The cuts in Social Security and Medicare in the discussion are not to save Social Security and Medicare. There's a little bait and switch going on. They are to help pay for these tax cuts. They get people to start nodding, we need to cut Social Security and Medicare because they're not sustainable. And then as soon as you agree to that, said, oh, good, we can now pay for the tax cuts. No, if you're going to cut Social Security and Medicare, keep the money over in Social Security and Medicare to extend the solvency. Don't steal the money as the discussion is now to pay for tax cuts, a lot of which went to millionaires. Put the choices on the table so everybody knows what's going on. Don't cut taxes now, and then look at this $1.2 trillion in cuts and think they're not related.
Peter? Yeah, when you get back and look at 20 years ago, approximately 28% of our economy was tied to the military spending. Now it's raised to 45, 46, 47% range. That has made us more susceptible to the problem we're in now. Secondly, we used to have senior legislators, Senator John Warner, Congressman Bateman, and so forth, that were senior ranking, and now, with all due respect to Congressman Scott, a lot of our new members are junior members. So their influence, I'm not quite sure what it is. But the point is, when we made this choice, as they say, in our region to let our economy go from 28% dependent upon military spending to 45, 46, 47, we now have become more susceptible to the situations you see now in Washington. And when you stop and think about it, the idea that 1.5 million people are having their economic destiny strongly influenced by a smaller group of people in Washington, in my mind, is kind of crazy. So what we need to do, obviously, I welcome additional military investment spending, but we need to expand the private sector side of the equation so we get more balance in our economy and we won't feel as much pain. A lot of the members of Congress that don't have the heavy concentration of military spending with a sequestration, they're not going to feel that kind of pain that we're going to feel here in Hampton Roads, as Congressman Scott is pointing out.
Do we have to diversify our economy more? Less military, smaller military?
Yeah, it can't hurt to diversify our economy. And in fact, diversifying our economy wouldn't take away from the military strength that is in our economy. It would actually probably strengthen and reinforce that. And in fact, you could diversify the economy by bouncing off of the military economy. You know, Northern Virginia to some extent has done that with the technology sector of the Northern Virginia economy. So we have to diversify our economy. I mean, there's no question about that.
All right, we're going to pick up with that after a break. We'll be back. Regina, what's coming up next?
Well, David, when we come back, we continue talking about the effects on Hampton Roads. Some sobering numbers released today, and we hear from the mayor of Norfolk about finding our future. The title of this broadcast is Sequestration, Finding Our Future. And that's no accident. We're looking into the effects of sequestration, but we also want to consider what the future holds for us. Hampton Roads is a military region, but are we overly dependent on defense spending? And this is not the first time we've run this drill. Remember the Brack scare of 2006? Oceana is a huge part of the Virginia Beach economy. Losing it and its 14,000 workers would be a catastrophe. And we almost did. Tonight we're not talking about closing bases, but we are talking about the possibility of losing work and income across Hampton Roads. Norfolk Mayor Paul Frame.
46% of the local economy is built around defense spending. We've counted over 700, nearly 730 companies in Norfolk that work with the defense industry. They include large companies with businesses here like General Dynamics and BAE Systems, and smaller subcontractors. And so the entire range of the defense industry is going to feel these impacts. Well, defense spending has grown over the last decade or so as we've been at war. And as it has grown, it has become a larger part of our economy, some 46%. The good news is that we have other sectors of our economy that have employment bases, and no single sector employs more than 16 or 17%. So beneath the defense spending, we already have a relatively diversified economy. What we have to do is then grow that diversification. We have to be more invested in things like tourism, for instance, high technology.
Quentin Kidd, Peter Shaw, and Craig Quigley are here once again. So the question again, are we overly dependent on defense spending?
Yeah, well, I mean, we recognize our dependence as a region on defense spending, and you hear, groups and people talk about and study the extent to which we need to diversify our economy. And for example, there's a lot of attention given to modeling and simulation and the role that that's playing in diversifying our economy. So we're dependent upon it, we recognize it, and there's efforts underway to diversify the economy for sure.
I mean, we recognize it. The good news is we recognize that we're heavily dependent on the federal sector in Hampton Roads, Regina, more so than before 9/11. So that was a benefit for the last decade or so. But if you say that defense spending and federal spending is on a downward slope for some number of years into the future, we'll feel that as well. Look, we have great strengths as a region, a temperate climate, an educated workforce, a pleasant place to live, 200 miles from our nation's capital. You cannot take that away from us. So let's use this as an opportunity to think broadly about what we could do to diversify that economy.
Okay, the one word that causes fear, encroachment. Okay, let's talk about the Good Friday miracle. We're coming up on the one-year anniversary of the F-18 that crashed into an apartment complex in Virginia Beach. Miraculously, no one was killed and very few injuries. This disaster what could have been a disaster could also point to a potential disaster for Oceana as a base. Is the future of Oceana in doubt when we look at encroachment around that base?
I think since the near-death experience of the 2005 round of base realignment and closure, awful lot of work has been done in rolling back encroachment around Oceana. I give great credit to the city of Virginia Beach. I give great credit to the General Assembly and the governor in continuously supporting the purchase of properties, rezoning, and to lessen the density. So keep up the good work. And the whole process that's been has become the national model of how to do it right. So never stop trying, never stop trying to improve, but we're headed in the right direction.
Not being a military strategist of any stripe, I would guess, though, that the Navy would prefer to leave Oceana where it is than move it, because I would imagine they would want the air wings near the ships more so than would want to move them. And so, I mean, I think the advantage is to the region. Virginia Beach is doing the right thing. The state of Virginia is doing the right thing. The advantage is to the region, I think. I mean, that's the way I look at it.
Yeah, I mean, if you do take the appropriate precautions to protect that huge military investment, the master jet base, then you can focus on bringing in spin-off industries of high technology, modeling simulation going into, you could envision, if you will, with a medical school here, bring in high-tech biotech work into this region and doing research. Using the modeling simulation work, not only for technology and to various other companies, but the entertainment industry uses modeling and simulation, and the gaming industry. That would be a tremendous industry to bring in here.
All right, lots to look forward to. David?
All right, well, our time has gone very quickly tonight, and when we come back, one more chat with our military reporter Mike Gooding about this issue of sequestration and finding our future. And we're back with a final word on this issue of sequestration with our military reporter Mike Gooding. Mike, it's been an enlightening conversation and a very sobering conversation.
It has indeed, and it's sobering in the following way. I mean, we have been sort of recession-proof here during these last 13 years of war since 9/11, while other places in the country like Detroit kind of crashed and burned. Maybe we're going to feel a little bit now what Detroit has felt, and that is very sobering indeed.
So it's back to work Monday for members of Congress. They're promising to work on this continuing resolution.
Right, and that's been another big problem for us, a thorn in our side, this continuing resolution. That is the thing that has caused the problem for the 11 ship repair contracts to have been essentially canceled, withdrawn. That is the thing that has caused the problem on the funding for the nuclear refueling and midlife overhaul for the USS Abraham Lincoln. Unless that gets resolved under this continuing resolution, we've heard from Mike Petters from Newport News Shipbuilding that some of his 21,000 workers at Newport News could get laid off. So the continuing resolution, very, very important problem. Different phrase than sequestration, but still very urgent.
What did you hear tonight that gave you the most concern?
What gave me the most concern is that there seems to be no meeting of the minds in terms of, Dems want to see cuts, in terms of what we're going to do with the entitlement, and the Repubs don't want to see anything but any revenue, and there's no meeting in the minds.
One issue that Congressman Bobby Scott talked about off camera is the FAA determining which airports could close down because of sequestration, and he noted to us that Newport News could be one of those airports that could close because of sequestration.
Well, and that would be terrible, of course, with the Hampton Roads Bridge Tunnel, all the peninsula people having to try to get down to the south side to use Norfolk International Airport. Can you imagine the chaos that would create? So, yeah, that's a very real and scary proposition.
And we sit here tonight with no real end in sight.
No real end in sight, because it's just going to be one crisis after another, because we have this great political divide in America where the left believes one thing, the right believes another, and there's no middle ground, it seems.
Well, we'll hope for something, huh?
Yeah, hope, fingers crossed.
Just a few more hours for the president to sign the final law on sequestration.
We want to thank our panel of experts for their insights tonight, and the lawmakers who are able to be with us as well tonight.
There's still activity in Washington tonight. We're following the developments for you. Reporter Brian Farrell will join us tonight on 13 News at 11 with a status update on this final hour before we hit midnight.
Good night.